Welcome to the Solemn Vanguard channel. Today I'm going to go over the top 5 best decks for the Vanguard Overdress meta of the coming month. Why should you listen to me on this topic? I currently have 3 Overdress tops and 18 total Vanguard tops, as well as 2 Worlds qualifications, so I'd like to think I'm competitive enough to have a solid opinion on this. As always, if you still need any Vanguard cards, you can go to 50cards.shop and use the code Solemn, link will be in the description. And if you need a beautiful new playmat, go to zerodamagegaming.com and use the code Solemn. We still have a bunch of designs up right now, including this one, which is brand new, one of my favorites in quite a while. If you want to up your Vanguard skills, however, you can also pick up Vanguard Mastery, which is my course on how to improve your game when it comes to Cardfight Vanguard. Without further ado, let's get into the top 5 decks. Now, these are not in any particular order, so if you're like, oh, but you said number 3, no, these are just the top 5 decks. I think all 5 of these decks are really solid, and you could take it to either Worlds or Springfest, depending on, when certain events are happening and which sets have come out. Number 1, we get into Overlord. Now, for the longest time, these encounter type of decks, which were introduced last year, were kind of seen as a bit of a meme. They were a bit weak. We had Overlord, we had PBO, and they really weren't doing all that much. But over time, they got more support, and recently, Overlord got a new promo, which basically fixed all of its issues. So now, we essentially have a deck with multi-attacking Vanguard, lots of pressure from that, and also a big-ass hand. Its minusing issue is basically gone. And this is also a trend you will be seeing on this list. You will notice a lot of decks actually have a Vanguard pressure these days in Overdress. Speaking of a Vanguard pressure, number 2 on this list is Lutetia. Now, there were a lot of arguments about whether this deck was good enough. It really wasn't topping that much, but we did see it consistently getting that first place, and when it would be played, it would tend to convert well, it would top well, it would get into top 4 and so forth. Interestingly as well, some of the best players on the planet, in my opinion, gradually caught on and started playing it more and more. So it was like a somewhat kept secret, but then gradually the word got out, and now it's just, okay, seems this deck ceiling is so high that it's actually worth it. It can always play out of a lot of situations and not a very resource intensive. You can usually, play your way out of issues. The only issue is when this deck doesn't reach its order count. That is like the only thing. Once you have that, awesome, you're in business. Its defensive order is also batshit insane, in my opinion. When I was testing against this deck with Youthberg, I was like, how is this fair? How is this card real? This is crazy. And so yeah, overall, once again, a multi-attacking Vanguard type deck is really good in Overdress. Who would have thought? Number 3 on this list, we have Youthberg. This is probably like the boogeyman. We saw in Japan this deck doing so incredibly well once set 7 dropped. Some people were even saying, oh, it's tier 0, it's tier 0. Yeah, Steam Maidens in V is tier 0 and in Overdress Youthberg is tier 0. This isn't that true. The deck is really strong, by the way. It's multi-attacking Vanguards, once again. It has a lot of plussing, it has some board control, it has a lot of ways to search for Persona Ride. It's overall a really well-oiled machine. It can really grind well, it does deck thinning, it does a lot. But I do want to say it also has its weaknesses, and that is that this deck requires a lot of things to be drawn before it actually plays. If this deck doesn't get its Persona Ride, it's in trouble. If this deck doesn't see Wayward Angels, it's kind of in trouble. If this deck doesn't see Sequana, it's kind of in trouble. If this deck doesn't see Tempest, it's kind of in trouble. It wants to see all of these things, ideally, in order to be good. And you might miss one of them, except for Persona and Tempest, but then you really already feel the ceiling of your deck going down. If you miss 2, yikes, then you're really playing an uphill battle. And so while this deck is absolutely insane, really strong, I do want to caution you from thinking like, oh, I'm going to be playing this deck and I'm always going to be winning, because this deck can absolutely have awful break games. If you're not Persona riding, this deck sucks ass. Also, if you want a beautiful new playmat, look at this thing. Oh, beautiful. We also have this and this. Whoa! Number 4 on this list, we have Eva. Now, this deck has been hyped up to hell because of different fights, so I probably don't have to explain too much, but it is actually one of the only decks on this list that's not a Vanguard restand deck. This is a rearguard multi-attack deck, basically relying on this grade 3. The deck also has a little bit of board control in the sense that it can bind stuff, which is a really solid way of removal. If you know or don't know, there's quite a few units in Overdress that come back from the drop zone. So Zorga, for example, doesn't want to see their Dragon bound. Youthberg lists don't want to see their Maple bound. There's a lot of things like this in the game right now, and so binding instead of retiring is quite good. The deck can also dig really well through the deck with Eva, and of course Combine Rusher coming back again and again is also really solid. This deck doesn't really do any big unfair things, it's just really good at like a couple things, but those couple things together makes a consistent strong deck. Finally on this list, and this is probably the more controversial one, I'd like to think that most people already agree with the 4 first ones. This last spot is contentious. This last spot you could say, oh, actually I want it to be this, actually I want it to be that, and you'd probably be right. The 5th spot still goes, in my opinion, to Gravidia. Now, wait, I know that Gravidia gets countered by Eva, and so whenever you believe Eva is really strong, Gravidia is gonna have a harder time. This is like the accepted reality right now. However, with so many other decks being as good or even better than Eva, I feel that Gravidia right now can kind of play again. And beyond that, I also believe that Gravidia is the only deck really with such a disgusting auto win, on top of being one of the few decks that consistently pluses like hell, that it still deserves to be on this list. Gravidia every single turn will draw 2 as long as you have Persona Ride on top of the 1 from Persona Ride, so you're basically drawing 3. It can double heal, it can double front, it can double crit, it can double draw if you're running draws over fronts. You're deck thinning like crazy and you will almost always hit the over trigger. And that's not me being biased or anything, you're simply deck thinning so much and drawing so much so you live long that you will almost always go through the entire deck. So you're either gonna draw the OT or hit the OT, and when you hit the OT, you're gonna auto win. You know, a lot of people can cry about, oh, OT isn't always an auto win. In Gravidia, it so often is. Not only are you often doubling it, so both sides are 100 million, 200 million, whatever number, with 6 criticals on everything, and just, it's over. Do you have 3 PGs every game? Good luck, but you really don't, realistically speaking. And even if you don't hit OT, you might just win off double hitting criticals. You're wiping the board, you're able to rush with the Shadow Army token. It's a really well-rounded deck. The only major weakness, in my opinion, in this deck is that it's really reliant on having Persona Ride. Now, it does draw a lot of cards, so this is not the biggest issue, but it is true that if you take Gravidia to a tournament and you're not really drawing Personas all day, yeah, the deck is gonna suck. But the same can kind of be said for a lot of decks, so I don't think that's like the strongest argument for not putting it on the list. With that being said, yes, if your locals is full of Eva players, it's probably not gonna make your top 5 anymore, and that's totally understandable. But if you're going to Worlds, I don't know if everyone's gonna be on Eva. They might, but I think the better players might be on Overlord Lutetia Youth rather than Eva. We'll see about that. If you want to kick Gravidia off the list, you can take Greedon, you can maybe take Prison, but in my opinion, all these other decks on the list already destroy Prison, whereas Gravidia, you know, can at least play its unfair game. So that was my top 5. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you still need some cards, 50cards.shop, use the code Solemn. If you need a beautiful playmat, go to zerodamagegaming.com and use the code Solemn, and I will see you soon. Ciao.